Morning, everyone.
All right, I got 9:01. So I'd like to call the committee meeting to order. Good morning, everyone. Sorry to take you away from the World Cup action, but it looks like the early action is not terribly exciting. Couple things just to get us started. As permitted by the governor's disaster declaration of November 10th, 2022, the determination has been made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent for this committee to meet in person. To ensure a transparent and open meeting as possible, we will post the meeting materials approximately 1 week in advance, which we've done. We'll provide a recording of this meeting. You are being recorded, linked on our website, and we'll take all votes by roll call. I believe staff has some additional virtual meeting logistics announcements before we take the roll. I'll turn it over to staff.
Yes, thank you, Bob. The meeting is being recorded, as you mentioned. Please use the mute function when not speaking. This will help to eliminate any excessive background noise. You can use the mute button, or those on the phone can press *6 to mute and unmute themselves. For members of the public, if you have questions during the meeting, please use the chat box, which staff will be monitoring. Additionally, if you wish to address the committee during the public comment agenda item, you can indicate your desire to do so in the chat box, or you can email one of the staff members. Our emails will be available. To members of the committee, when making a motion, please include your name so staff can properly record it as well. That concludes the meeting announcements. Thank you.
Thank you, Austin. Well, if staff could now, please call the roll.
Sure, will do. Bob Tucker.
I am here.
Kim Porter.
Here.
Thank you. Adam Bullard. Dion Bowe. Peter Kretikos.
Here.
Chrissy De Laurentiis.
I'm here, thank you.
Thank you. Joan Fox.
Here.
Kendra Freeman.
Here.
Thank you. John Furr. I think he let us know he would not be able to make it. Veronica Gonzalez. Kevin Kramer.
I'm here.
Perfect. Marissa Lewis. Tiffany McDowell. Shannon McGee. Mike Myers.
Shannon's just joining us right now.
Perfect.
Present. Mike Myers, present.
Thank you, Mike. Josh Potter.
Here.
Thank you. Obai Reed.
Here.
Thank you. Caitlin Ritter.
Here.
Thank you. Jennifer Tammon. Oh, it looks like I skipped over Darnell Shields. Okay. Michael Horsting.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. And Tara Orban.
Present.
Perfect. With 14 members in attendance, we have a quorum.
Shannon McGee just joined as well.
Oh, good morning. Welcome.
Thank you,
Good morning.
Did we miss
Excellent.
anybody else?
Anyone else just joined? All right, let's move on then to 2.01. Are there any agenda changes? All right.
Not happening.
All right, hearing none, we'll move on to the next item. We are lucky to have with us Executive Director Erin Ailman, and she has a few words for us. Erin.
Hi, good morning. At least it's sunny out, and as I checked the weather this morning, it was like 10 degrees warmer. So happy Monday morning to everyone. This morning on your agenda, you'll get an update on our strategic direction, which you've heard about at past meetings. You know, one of the reasons why we're developing the strategic direction is because our 2050 plan looks out over 30 years. And this strategic direction really will allow staff and the agency the framework to focus our strengths and our efforts on advancing the goals of the 2050 plan within the next 3 to 5 years. Again, the aim is really to help us focus our work and to figure out what we can commit to and move the ball down the court on in a shorter term window. So the creation of this committee earlier this year, along with a new structure for our climate committee, and we're in discussions right now with transportation committees, align with our core areas of focus: regional economy, climate, and transportation. Again, you really do play a vital role in advising and shaping the policies that advance the objectives in this plan. And again, helping us make that connection to our board and them understanding the relevance of the work on the regional economy section of the strategic direction. So we really do value your knowledge and expertise. So I want to thank you for that. Also on your agenda this morning, you'll see an update on our regional mobility work. Again, this project was set in motion about 2 years ago and really sought to develop a visionary mobility strategy for Northeastern Illinois post-pandemic and think about how our transportation network can better serve all residents. Given the pandemic's impact, I think this work is more important than ever before. You'll also see and hear the recommendations as to how this report aligned with the 2050 goals and lay a strong foundation for our continued work to achieve the region's goals. So now that the mobility recovery work is wrapping up, our focus is going to turn to a report that we were required to develop to the General Assembly. We're due to deliver it in January of 2024, so a little bit over a year, on the state of transit with specific recommendations. Again, we're going to get to work on this project with a steering committee in January. You'll hear much more about this work in the coming months, and we're calling it our Plan of Action for Regional Transit, or our PART initiative. And we're working really closely with the RTA on this project as well. Staff will also be presenting on regional housing today. I think many of us know that where you live makes a huge difference in your life and what you're able to access in terms of your jobs and your health outcomes. The infrastructure bill, the federal infrastructure bill that was passed earlier this year, asks CMAP to take a look more closely at housing and to coordinate housing more tightly to our transportation recommendations as well. So we've done a lot of housing work since the inception of this agency, but this new flexibility really allows us as an agency to think about the housing challenges across the region in a new, more meaningful way. So we're looking forward to engaging you in a dialogue and help us think about both the key housing issues our region is facing right now and the role that CMAP should have in addressing these challenges. And then finally, I just wanted to remind you, if you haven't seen, we are going to have our Regional Excellence Awards again this year. We're accepting nominations for the 2023 Regional Excellence Awards program. It's our second year to offer this program. We encourage municipal leaders, nonprofits, transportation agencies, and advocates to submit nominations for individuals or for projects that prioritize equity, strengthen the resiliency of our communities, and make them more economically competitive. If you could help us spread the word, we'd appreciate it too. Information can be found on our website, and I'll see if I can find that link and pop it in the chat here for you. The deadline to submit nominations is Friday, December 16th. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer questions if anyone has one, but otherwise that concludes my report for this morning.
Well, thank you so much, Erin. Always so good to see you, and thank you for taking the time to join us. Are there any questions for Erin? All right, well, that was a terrific preview, so let's get on with it. Let's move on to the next item. A copy of the minutes from September 26, 2022 were included in the meeting packet. Are there any requested changes or corrections or questions on the minutes? Okay, hearing none. Can I get a motion and a second to approve the minutes, please?
Tara Orban, motion to approve.
Thank you.
Seconds approval.
Great. I hope the minute taker got those. Are there any questions on the motion? All right, hearing none. Can I get a roll call, please?
Sure. If the committee members could please unmute themselves at this time. Bob Tucker,
Yes.
Kim Porter,
Yes.
Adam Ballard, Peter Kretikos,
Yes.
Chrissy De Laurentiis,
Yes.
Joan Fox,
I'm marked as absent for that meeting.
Kendra Freeman,
Yes.
Kevin
This is
Kramer.
Adam Ballard. I'm a yes, sorry.
Thank you, Adam. Kevin Kramer,
Yes.
Shannon McGee,
Yes.
Mike Myers,
Yes.
Josh Potter,
Yes.
Obaye Reed,
Yes.
Caitlin Ritter.
I was also absent for that meeting.
Thank you, Caitlin. Michael Horsting
I'm ex officio member, but the minutes look great to me. Thank you.
and Tara Orban.
Same goes, ex officio.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Great. Thank you, Austin. Our next item is the 2023 CMAP Regional Economy Committee meeting schedule. And we'll start with an overview from our liaison, Austin.
Yes, thank you. So as a creature of the CMAP board, we are a public body. And so with, in accordance with that, we need to abide by the Meetings Act, part of which requires us to take a vote to approve our meeting schedule for the upcoming year. Alongside that, we are trying to adapt and evolve with the changing times around hybrid meeting options. I think we will continue to provide a hybrid meeting option into the future. As the chair mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we are still under a disaster declaration from the governor, which allows us to run entirely virtually. Should that change at any point, we will need to return to an in-person quorum, although some members will still be able to join through hybrid options, because we want to take advantage of the benefits of both having some in-person conversations as well as the convenience that hybrid and virtual options provide, particularly for people who would have a longer trip into the city. So we will monitor that and try to get word out to everyone as soon as we can when we have a clearer picture. But for the moment, we will continue to take advantage of the hybrid options. With that, we are suggesting that this year we met on the third Mondays in a couple of months. We have suggested that we switch from Mondays to Thursdays to give people a little bit easier trick for getting started with their weeks, and then also changing some of the months that we're going to meet in so that we can get a little bit more balance across the course of the year. So we can see your beautiful faces on a more regular basis rather than having these really long gaps over the course of the summer. So with that, we're suggesting that the committee meet on Thursday, January 26th, Thursday, April 27th, Thursday, July 27th, and Thursday, October 26th, all of which would be at 9 a.m. With that, we will need a motion and a second, as well as a roll call vote to approve the schedule for 2023.
Great. Any questions or comments? Does anyone demand treats if it's in person? Anything like that? No, hearing none. Can I get a motion in a second, please?
This is Kevin
We
Kramer. I'll
want
make a motion
treats.
to approve the 2023 schedule.
There did seem to be a friendly amendment about treats, but I think we'll let that slide for now. I'm not sure who.
With the requirement for at least coffee at minimum.
We can always supply coffee.
Yeah, we can't. Yeah, that just goes without saying. I'm sorry, who made the motion?
Kevin Kramer.
Thank you, Kevin. And who was the second?
I'll second De Laurentiis.
Thank you, Chrissy. Are there any questions on the motion? Hearing none, can we have a roll call, please?
Sure. Bob Tucker,
Yes.
Kim Porter,
Yes.
Adam Bullard, I stepped away. Peter Kritikos,
Yes.
Christy De Laurentiis,
Yes.
Joan Fox,
Yes.
Kendra Freeman,
Yes.
Kevin Kramer,
Aye.
Shannon McGee,
Yes.
Mike Myers,
Yes.
Josh Potter,
Yes.
Obaye Reed,
Yes.
Caitlin Ritter,
Yes.
and then our two ex officio members, 14 Orban.
Great. Thank you, Austin. As Aaron highlighted for us, our next item is CMAP's proposed strategic direction. And we'll start that presentation by Alex Ensign.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. This is actually going to be a pretty brief update, but I did want to update the Regional Economic Competitiveness Committee on our progress with the strategic direction, and also take a few moments for a little discussion to tee us up for the much more substantive housing discussion that Jonathan Birch is going to lead later on in this meeting. Next slide, please. So over the past, I think, 7 months that I've been here, we've put a lot of work into refining and updating the strategic direction to really cohere some of the strategies that we have in the 3 focus areas of transportation, economy, and climate. So in the spring, we did engage with the committees, including this one, to refine some of those approaches using the theory of change framework. And we've taken a lot of those recommendations and we're incorporating them into an updated draft of the strategic direction that is right now undergoing executive review. We also held 10 workshops with all staff at the agency across all 5 divisions. We also held some workshops on each specific focus area, and then we held workshops on the intersection between the different focus areas to make sure, for example, that our work in freight, which falls mostly under the transportation, but somewhat under the economy umbrella, is also not compromising any of our climate goals. So today, I'm happy to report that the latest draft of the strategic direction is currently undergoing review by the executive team. We hope to have it finalized so that beginning in very first day of January 2023, we can use this final draft of the strategic direction to guide the development of dashboards to guide our work that will incorporate some of the indicators that were brainstormed in part by this committee and also by quite a few members of staff to hold ourselves accountable and track our progress. It's my hope that in Q1 of 2023, as we develop those dashboards, we can share some of this baseline data with the committee starting in the second quarter of 2023 and report regularly after that in a quarterly cadence for every committee meeting. Next slide, please. So alongside this work on refining the approaches and outcomes and assumptions, indicators, and a lot of the pieces of the strategic direction, we've also been hard at work developing clear program areas for CMAP's work to fall into. As part of that work, CMAP has promoted and assigned program leads for 4 of our really important program areas. One is air quality and water resources. Another is safe and complete streets. And we have transit and financial planning and MPO active project management. These are 4 of our kind of really important buckets of work that we wanted to devote a specific staff member to lead these program areas. We're also developing program areas to organize our projects a little bit more closely to the strategic direction. And we'll be developing program charters to really solidify those program areas even further, again, in Q1 of 2023. Those will help CMAP to, in addition to our annual work plan, develop more cohesive multi-year programs in each of these areas so that we can really plan out our work over the next 3 to 5 years. And as I mentioned before, we're going to be working on these beautiful dashboards and Power BI that I hope to reveal to the committee early next year so that we can share some of our baseline data related to these strategic direction goals. Next slide, please. So in line with what we've been doing over the past few meetings related to the strategic direction, I wanted to share a potentially updated set of approaches and outcome for one of our housing branches of the economy focus area to help tee up the discussion today. And then I also wanted to ask the committee your thoughts and your input on what these assumptions and potential indicators might look like. These are some draft assumptions and potential indicators that we've developed for this particular pathway with the outcome of hopefully generating greater diversity in housing choices that have access to economic opportunity. So the 2 approaches that CMAP has developed to achieve this outcome are to develop policies and analysis that demonstrate the economic benefits of improving the diversity, affordability, and connectedness of the region's housing stock. The second approach that would feed into this outcome is that CMAP develops and supports the implementation of strategies for communities to increase their diversity and affordability of housing options connected to transportation networks. It's our hope that through these two approaches, namely using our policy and analysis levers and also our plan implementation levers to generate this greater diversity of housing choices. Some of the assumptions that staff generated that we thought would need to be considered and updated as we continue this work are that a lot of our levers do involve the fact that transportation is the lens through which CMAP will generate interest in housing. Another is really thinking of housing as an economic asset versus a shelter as a need. Of course, housing is both, but it's a very specific approach to think of housing as an economic asset. Another is we're acknowledging that CMAP does have strategies to increase the housing mix. One assumption that's pretty important for making sure this approach is the right approach is acknowledging that the diversity of housing leads to greater affordability. And then thinking specifically about what that means when it comes to construction of new housing versus the preservation of existing housing, because those are somewhat different approaches. And then lastly, that physical access to economic opportunity would guarantee gainful employment. Those don't necessarily follow, but you are creating the space for economic opportunity, hopefully. So some of the indicators that have also been brainstormed by staff and from previous engagement with this committee include things like the rate of housing burden, lower number of people experiencing homelessness, property tax by acre, proximity to transit. I won't read through all of them, but we've brainstormed quite a few potential indicators. What I'm hoping is that I could take a few minutes with the committee today to hear what indicators you think would be actually the most useful for us to hold ourselves accountable and to report back to this committee on this work. It's my hope that with each of these indicators, we'd like them to really tie to that outcome and incorporate what CMAP can control and influence. Some of our on to 2050 indicators, for example, are they're very large, they're very broad, and they also don't necessarily change very quickly. You see most change over decades and over year to year. And what we'd like to do with the strategic direction indicators is think like on a slightly smaller scale so that we can see some movement with these indicators, for example, quarterly or twice a year, see some sort of change in the indicators. So with that, I'll open it up to any thoughts, initial thoughts or questions. I think I've seen some thoughts in the chat, but I haven't been able to read it yet.
No, Alex, that was absolutely a terrific presentation. Thank you so much. You're busy. So with that, yeah, let's open it up. Let's have a conversation. Do we have questions or comments for Alex?
This is Adam. I'm from AARP. Yeah, just kind of expanding on what I already put in the chat. It gets tricky, not tricky enough, but all these things are important. And like Bob said, I thank you for your work, Alex. But we need to talk about access in a way that we explicitly talk about access to opportunity and accessibility to the housing stock for people with disabilities, right? So I see physical access, and I understand saying physical access to economic opportunity is important, and it is. But most people, when they see physical access, they are going to think, is this home accessible to people with mobility impairments? So I think we just need to be a little more, it needs a little more wordsmithing, right? To explicitly say that this is also about, because the commitment to new construction over rehab, and again, I think both are important. There's a whole other conversation there, but I think I understand what I'm trying to say, but I want to make sure that we are capturing what this work, which I know is inclusive of disability access, but it's not explicitly called out in the language that's being used so far, if that makes sense.
I think it does. Alex, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you for that comment, Adam. I think one reason why it's not necessarily as explicit in this pathway is that we've actually created several pathways that are directly related to our ADA work that do call out the need for things to be physically accessible, for municipalities to have ADA transition plans in place, and also to make sure that things like housing and transportation networks are accessible to those with disabilities.
You know, yeah, I'm aware of that as well, and that's great. I just want to make sure, and this is, I get this is wonky, but we have to be clear that the ADA does not address housing, right? So talking about ADA transition plans will not impact housing stock at all. We've got to talk about Fair Housing Act design standards, right? We've got to. So if we're gonna talk about ADA transition, we've also got to talk about fair housing design compliance as well, as explicitly as we're talking about ADA transition. In my opinion.
Absolutely. That's an excellent point, Adam, and you are correct in that.
Well, thank you for that, Adam, and I agree. And you certainly don't want to get wonky with this group. Anyways, Peter, I saw your hand up.
I just pulled it down. That's Adam covered it.
Oh, sorry about that, Peter. You're right. I no longer see your hand up. Any other questions, comments? Any other thoughts or other additions that Alex should be looking at here?
I'll raise my hand. This is Kevin Kramer. Just a couple of clarifications on your indicators. And maybe this is just me not knowing, but is housing burden a specific something you can quantifiably measure? And then the other comment regarding indicators, just property tax per acre. Is that increased property taxes per acre, or is that supposed to go up or down? Which way do you want it to go? And then, yeah, I like the last couple there on the percent of income, as well as just some of the mix of housing options out there in terms of the indicator. Then my last comment on the assumptions, just that first assumption, I feel like, to me at least, it sounded like CMAP will be driving all interest in housing rather than transportation is the lens through which CMAP may generate interest in housing. Because if you have a free public transit, the most perfect public transit everyone would want to take from their job to a landfill, it doesn't mean you're going to want to live like on the landfill, I guess, unless it's one of those landfills that's now not in use anymore as a landfill. But my point being, like it's one way CMAP, like the way CMAP will assist in that, but not will generate, meaning like it's all on us kind of. It's still up to the community to create the interest of why you would want to live in that neighborhood or that community.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you've made several good points. I'll address just the first one so that I don't forget, but the rate of housing burden is, yes, that is something that is quantified. That's a term that's used when you examine, for example, I think the two ways we quantify it are by the percentage of monthly income being used on housing, in the same way that there's a transportation burden where you spend a large part of your income on transportation. If you spend over 1/3 of your monthly income on rent or mortgage, and often for people on the low to moderate income level, they often spend up more than half of their income on housing. That's a significant housing burden. So that is quantifiable. It's really the amount of rent or mortgage.
So then those first and last indicators are somewhat similar?
Yeah, it's very similar. The difference between the two is actually that the last one, it gets a little bit more specific because it's looking at the percent of income spent on housing and transportation by low and moderate income households. So it's really just pulling out those households in the mix.
Cool. All right.
Great. Kevin, thank you for that feedback. Great questions. Michael.
I also agree with Kevin in regards to looking at this and seeing more so CMAP's influence over housing as opposed to driving transportation to influence these things that you're assuming and looking to have result out of these assumptions, I guess. But I also was wondering, could we see some more in here about the diversity of transportation options around these housing issues? If we're talking about transportation, if I'm off there.
No, thank you, Michael. Alex, any reactions to that?
Yes, that actually is one of the ways in which we did draw out nuance in this particular pathway when we were discussing how intersected with a pathway in our transportation focus area that calls out the need for greater diversity in transportation options for communities. So we've recognized that those two pathways are actually very closely linked and should be worked alongside each other.
Great, thank you. Joan, I see your hand up.
Yes, Alex, can you tell me more about the assumption, the second one, housing is an economic asset versus shelter as a need?
So this is an assumption that, and I can't recall which member of the staff pointed out this assumption, but this set of approaches specifically is thinking about housing in an economic, through a lens of being an economic asset and not necessarily shelter as a need. So it's not, it's just a nuance through which we're thinking of housing. One reason to put this assumption in, explicitly in this pathway is that, for example, a lot of the pushback against affordable housing has revolved around thinking of this diversity of housing choices or mixed income housing as really a burden on a community, when in fact, the research shows that having more, mixed income and diverse housing actually generates economic benefits for communities. So it's kind of pushing back against this misinformation that can cause communities to not want a diversity of housing choices. So if you're really reframing them as not just shelter as a need, but really an economic asset to the communities in which they could be built or rehabbed, it can shift the conversation.
Thank you.
And Joan, maybe you had the same reaction I had, which was like, we're not like pitting one against the other, right? It's just a different way for us to do the analysis, certainly not suggesting that shelter as a need isn't equally important.
Right.
I totally get the comment. Other questions, other comments? This is great.
Actually, I do have my hand up now.
Are you sure, Peter? Okay.
Yeah. Well, no, only because I'm following up on this comment. So saying that housing is a need is different than saying housing is a right. And is that where is CMAP in that sort of spectrum?
That's a good question. I think that's something that hasn't really been discussed in the strategic direction. I think the notion that housing is a human right is not one that anyone at CMAP would disagree with. I'm not sure if it's something that we've specifically talked about in this pathway, but I mean, there is, I think, Can
I jump in here?
Yeah,
Alex.
Thank you.
Sorry to be butting in. The sun. I have not sat at this table as the seasons change. The sun is directly behind me. That's a conversation that we've not necessarily had at our board level. So when I wasn't here when the 2050 plan was developed, but that language wasn't incorporated in the 2050 plan. Nor was it incorporated into the update. But, as we approach these next few years, we'll be embarking on scoping the 2060 plan. And I think, again, some of these policy discussions around how we frame the need for housing, is it a human right? Is it an economic asset? Are things that we look to our committee members to raise with our board for their consideration, because you are committees of the board, so that we could have those discussions at the broader board level with the mayors and the appointed officials who are on our board. I think those are some things that we can take note of to bring back for the, development of the 2060 plan for sure. And recognizing lots lots of things have changed, and the way that we frame things and think about things have shifted dramatically over the past couple of years, and the acceptance of this has gotten greater. I think those are really great points for us to bring back to the board.
I would welcome a conversation like that. I don't know if it's the Economic Policy Committee or if it's somebody else, but it would seem to me that that's a good conversation to have, although I recognize that given my age, 2060 is probably beyond my reach, but I'd like to always try to influence somebody else's future.
Peter, I started doing the math myself when she said 2060. Any other comments or questions? And thank you for weighing in on that, Peter. Appreciate it.
I would like to hear a little bit about the last assumption there to physical access to economic opportunity. It's guaranteed gainful employment. And I'm wondering in that scope if economic opportunity includes both economics, like job opportunities, as well as schools and thinking about children and families, and if that's a consideration here in your assumptions or in the plan.
Yes, thank you, Joan. That's an excellent question. I think economic opportunity is supposed to be it's a phrase that's a little bit broader than just access to jobs, and I think it does include the acknowledgement that there must be a mix of jobs, good schools, housing. You need all of those together to create kind of a trifecta that will allow for economic opportunity. So what we're questioning with this assumption is whether just having access to that does lead to more people becoming gainfully employed. It's more of a question of whether one follows the other. If you build it, will they come? And it's mostly something to just keep in mind as we're developing these approaches, because I think you do need that sort of nuance when you're thinking about this kind of economic development.
Great. Well, look at this conversation you've sparked, Alex. Good work. Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Alex, I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about the bullet point at the bottom here about money programmed by CMAP to support TOD. My apologies if I missed it if you covered this during the presentation, but I was wondering what that means. Is it some capital funding, or is it additional planning funding towards supporting municipal efforts to realize TOD throughout the region?
Yes, so one of the ways that we were trying to brainstorm with these indicators was thinking both about how CMAP could influence at the policy level, the planning level, and then thinking about implementation and programming. CMAP does move a lot of federal money through the region through our programming work. So I don't think at the moment we're really measuring how money programmed by CMAP supports TOD. At least not to my knowledge. I can't say I have perfect knowledge of all of our programming work because a lot goes on in those programming committees. But really thinking about how our programming funding, which can really be a significant amount of funding moving through the region, could support transit-oriented development. So I think this would be a new indicator. Some of these are new indicators, some of them are existing indicators that we could use for this pathway.
And Alex, I'll just add on to that. We'll hear a little bit later about how some of the latest legislation under IIJA allows CMAP and other MPOs to more explicitly consider housing availability and the impacts of the transportation investments when we are programming federal dollars. So we will have a little bit more runway in order to be able to incorporate housing into our transportation programs, as well as our planning funds.
And as we always throw out a lot of different letters, to be clear, the transit-oriented development and the notion of trying to develop housing and other amenities close to centralized hubs of mass transportation is one of the crucial tenets I think we're working with here. So when we talk about TOD, that's what we're talking about. But any other questions, comments? All right. Well, thank you again, Alex. Terrific job. Let's keep the meeting moving. Our next item is the mobility recovery update and development of the transit system report. We'll start with a presentation by Elizabeth Scott. Elizabeth.
Hi, everyone. Good morning.
It's been a minute since I've visited with you all, but it's really nice to be back. You know, for those of you I've never met before, and there are some, I'm Elizabeth Scott, a principal policy analyst at CMAP. And you know, Erin in her opening remarks alluded to this presentation, but what I'm here to talk with you all about today is kind of a program of work that CMAP has been engaged in since 2020, when we realized that the pandemic wasn't a blip and it wasn't going away, and we were going to have to put together some more long-term plans. So I have two projects that we're going to discuss. One is a project that we're just wrapping up now, which we've been calling Mobility Recovery. This is a research and scenario planning, kind of envisioning the future policy development exercise that staff have been undergoing to try and understand the effects of COVID on the transportation system. And then the next piece is going to be our plan of action of regional transit, to talk to you more about what the legislature has asked us to do, what our plan of work is, and kind of like what's on deck for the next year. And then I'd like to kind of end engaging you all in what will be the first of several conversations about the regional economy and the transit system. So yeah, with that, let's get into it. So yeah, Mobility Recovery is the first phase of work that we did. As I mentioned, it was in around July of 2020, we thought, oh my gosh, there's so much changing here. Let's do what we can in the sort of eye of the storm to try and understand what the future may look like. Next slide. So CMAP put together a project to try to figure out answers to the medium-term transportation challenges caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. What would it be? What do we need to do as a region so that we can stay on track for the goals, the long-term big goals that we identified in the plan? And so work that we did through this project were, we did best practice scans from domestically and around the world. We talked with a lot of different, you know, stakeholders about their perspective on what was happening with the transportation system broadly. We did some research that, you know, pretty proud of, because it seems to have been somewhat in the neighborhood of what we're experiencing now. We did research about what we thought the effects on jobs, housing, and transportation patterns would be. We did scenario planning. We did a lot of financial modeling, and then we came up with a set of strategies. So that's really been the last 2 years kind of work that the team has been doing. Next slide. And just to give you a little taste of some of this, because I think that this is subject matter that you all will find interesting. One of the things that we did was apply some early survey-based journal research to what our understanding based on NAICS codes of the locations of different jobs are in the region. So we created basically industry-based propensity to telework scores and mapped that out across the region and started to use it as a way to give some information to our travel demand model and try to understand the way commutes might change. And if that's like a lot of word salad to you, I'll just say we tried to figure out the places where we would expect, the job locations where we would expect a lot of people to be teleworking in the future, places we would expect people to not be driving to or taking transit to, commuting to. And overall, what we learned is that prior to COVID, we think somewhere under 10% of workers in the region were teleworking on an average weekday. And based on this analysis that we did in 2020, which seems to be, you know, somewhat accurate to this point, we thought that the COVID impact could be up to a quarter of employees working remotely on any given weekday. And of course, this means that in some industries, many, like a much higher share, like the majority of people may be working remotely. And in some industries, people might not be working remotely at all because that's not possible. We do know that the majority of workers in this region work in industries where remote work is not likely. Next slide. So even in the midst of change, we knew that we had to plan for people who needed to continue to travel. And so, you know, we'll see if this term essential worker sticks with us, but But in 2020, 2021, that, was what people were talking about. And here's a map of the region, the areas where the region's essential workers were traveling from. So bringing together these kind of different factors, and then doing all of the quantitative and sort of policy development exercises I talked about before, led us in this work to kind of a set of 3 broad recommendations. Next slide. And this report is going to come out in the next couple of weeks. We'll make sure you get a link to it. It's going to be an interactive online report. But so we have 2 years under our belt, basically, of research in these 3 categories. We determined through this process that what we wanted to recommend were strategies to invest in a stronger and more financially secure transit system. So this would include things like an integrated fare system, how to move the bus faster and better throughout the region, and how to raise money needed to support the transit system in the absence of revenue that was previously generated by fares. We talked about strategies to enable expanded travel by safe and active modes. So this is infrastructure investment and policy investments to create more safe and attractive environments for users of non-car modes. We also have some discussion in this area of the report of how we might, through updating development regulations, create some opportunities for new development in areas such as like underutilized parking lots, the economic use of which has changed due to the pandemic. And then finally, in the report, we also have a lengthy discussion about what policies need to be put in place to accelerate the transition to an electric freight system or a zero emissions freight system. A big piece of the rise of e-commerce coming out of the pandemic too is that we know that the environmental justice negative impacts are also rising due to truck activity throughout the region. So this is just to give you a taste of the types of things that are in this report and that you will be getting a link to in a couple of weeks when it's ready to come out, but also to give you a sense that we have been working on this subject matter for quite a while. And we're going to take basically the first pillar, so the one all the way to the left in the light blue, around the work that we did on the transit system, and bring that into the next piece of work that I'm going to describe to you. So next slide, please. Excuse me. So we have the mobility recovery project, which we're just finishing. And now we have this new project, the Plan of Action for Regional Transit, or PART. The legislature passed and the governor signed in this last year a piece of legislation requiring CMAP in consultation with the RTA to develop a program of legislative recommendations to support the needs of the transit system. Next slide, please. And so this is just notes the Public Act. If you want to look at it yourself, it's 102-1028. It's not particularly long, but it's got a lot in it. I don't know if you all have heard this yet. I'm sure some of you have, but by the RTA's estimate, we are going to need to raise $750 million every year to support the operating shortfall for the region's transit system. And that's just to get us back to the zero of 2019. For us to have the system of 2019 in the absence of federal aid, it's going to be $750 million a year and growing. So this is the major challenge of this moment, to try and understand that and understand what it is that the region needs to do to have a secure, stable, solvent transit system to carry us into the future. And so obviously this is really related to the economy, which is why we want to bring this to you all to talk about the economic dimensions, the local community dimensions, and also give you a sense of what it is that the team is going to be doing and we're going to be working on. It's going to be a sprint over the next year to try and really identify some solutions that we can bring forward in this report. So next slide. So the legislation gives us a lot to do. It requires that CMAP examine the long-term financial viability of a comprehensive and coordinated transit system that moves people safely, securely, cleanly, efficiently, and supports and fosters efficient land use. So that's like all the big ones there. And that throughout these strategies, we have to be fully incorporating and considering racial equity, climate change, economic needs, the work that's already been done by the RTA and others, and that some of the recommendations may come in regulatory changes to what's called the recovery ratio. So this is like in statute currently, our region's transit system has to recover basically 50% of its revenue from fares. And we think based on the way ridership has changed, at least in the medium term, that's probably going to need to change. So that's going to give you an example of that. But this could also, and this is a big one for this committee, have to do with proposing a change to the sales tax, either in the region or in the state. You know, long-term CMAP policy recommendation has been to expand the base of the sales tax to include services, more like, how do I put this? Not so much B2B services, but like getting a screen door installed, getting a haircut. There's a whole range of things that are taxed in other states that are not taxed here that we've been talking about, including in the sales tax base, for a long time. So that's a piece of it, as are talking about governance, fare systems, and then anything else we think is necessary that we come up with in the process. So it's a little bit like everything in the kitchen sink, which is great to have the focus of the top line need, but also some flexibility from the legislature on what we end up putting together. So next slide, please. And kind of as I was mentioning, we have a lot of work that's been going on these last 2 years and prior that we can build on. So CMAP has been doing the mobility recovery work for the last 2 years. We obviously have the direction that the region set in On to 2050, which many of you were involved in, but our transit partners have also been, working hard, figuring out how to respond to COVID. And then, there's a wide variety of other things that we can also leverage. So we're not starting from zero. We have a pretty good sense of what the things are that we're going to need to address. And from my perspective, this project will really be about deepening and sharpening our policy proposals in areas where we've kind of discussed things for some time, but now it's time to bring forward a substantial proposal. Next slide. And so what is the team going to be doing? The legislation requires that we have a steering committee. A steering committee will be made of business, civic, labor, community, and environmental stakeholders. So we're inviting those folks right now, and we're going to be ready to launch our steering committee in January. We also have some consultant assistance on some of the technical work that we need to do around the sales tax and some of the other transit, kind of like the functions of the transit system recommendations we think we want to make. And then we have programmed over 4,000 hours of CMAP staff time. So we're going to be working very diligently over the next really 11 months to try and get to a report, because the legislation also requires that CMAP's board and MPO policy committee approve our report before we send it to the legislature. So that really gives staff like 3 quarters in the new year to develop, submit, and seek approval for the report. So lots to do. And in the midst of it, we will meet with you at your, I think, first 3 dates that you've defined for your new schedule. So you can anticipate that we'll be bringing this work to you at all of those meetings. And as we have more policy ideas, particularly related to the economy, we'll try to have some focused conversation with you about what those ideas are, to ask for your help, kicking the tires, strengthening, identifying issues, iterating on together some of the things that we know we need to do. We'll also be doing public engagement, broader stakeholder engagement, lot of meetings with a lot of people. If this is particularly interesting to you, please let Austin and Dominic know. We'd love to visit with you and hear your thoughts. Okay. Next slide, please. And so that's a picture of what we're kind of up against and what the team is going to be doing. And so I was hoping to engage you all in a conversation about, you know, some of the topics that are going to be affecting the work that we're doing. But before I do that, it looks like there's maybe some questions in the chat, or if anybody has a question, a procedural question, or, you know, like I went too fast and it makes no sense.
No, not at all. Elizabeth, first of all, really good to see you. Great work. Wow, some sobering numbers and some real challenges ahead of us. I think in the chat, Michael was already stepping up to tell you he is very interested in participating in knowing and being involved more. So please note that. Let me open it up. Well, Christy's got her hand up already. Christy.
Hi, Christy.
Hi, thanks. Hi, thank you. Elizabeth, just a question that I have for you is, could you just explain a little bit more about the report to the legislature? And you know, you did a great job talking about the timetable and really what the need is and whatnot, but what's the end result when they receive the report? What's the anticipated outcome? Is that just a status report? Are they expected to take some action, impact, you know, future legislation or funding, distribution? Just curious about that.
That's an excellent question. Our goal is to bring them a slate of recommendations that meaningfully address the elements that are defined in the Public Act, that are like at least in some part implementable. Some things we anticipate, you know, will be identified for further study or more work, but the goal is more action oriented than advisory, I think you could say, if that answers your question. We anticipate having recommendations in some operational areas, supporting things the region is already working on, like an integrated transit fare system, thinking about ways that we can speed up the bus, exploring what sort of next generation suburban rail model could look like, both from the you know, like what the train actually does, but also from the support of land use standpoint. So there are some things in that category. We also anticipate doing a lot of work around how we're going to raise this money. So we think it probably has to do with sales tax, something about road pricing. We're working on that right now. And then a set of other revenues that are going to have to come alongside in order to annually raise the amount of money required. Because it's almost $1 billion when the federal aid runs out in 2025. So we're facing this in 2026. And, you know, with inflation and everything, that's anticipated to grow year over year. So we have to come up with a long-term sustainable and stable approach to funding these shortfalls. So there'll be money recommendations. And then I think, Christy, you were getting to this a little bit too. We will take a look at how, like, once we've identified these policies, the resource policies and the function of the system policies, we will then think about what any other changes would need to be made to implement them or allow them to be implemented. But yeah, we're not intending to write a report to tell somebody else to write a report.
Great, thank you. That very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Christy. Unless Peter's trying to trick me again. Peter, you have a question?
No, just a couple of comments. The fare box recovery ratio, which was established in the 80s, and I have firsthand experience with that since I was on staff when we drafted that, was its history was excuse me, my dog is here. The history was punitive, in part. It was excuse me. It was a way to get, essentially it was a way to stick it to the CTA. And we've never left that. It was, it and has been enshrined in statute, and to my amazement, it's still there. I don't know how you break out of it, because there's a sense of pay as you go responsibility. But it's one that is historically just no longer relevant, but it is there, and figuring out strategies and how to deal with it. I know Schlickman tried to deal with it when he was running the RTA, and it's just has not gone away. So good luck on that. The other is on the sales tax piece of it. There are two elements. One's the structural differences between what percent tax is levied where. And historically, again, and this predates me, that was established, the differences were established in order, first of all, to get the RTA even enacted. And the sense was that the exurbs at the time felt that, Collier counties felt that they simply didn't need the transit service. And so they didn't think they had to pay as much as anybody else. I think part of the challenge there is showing that the services are needed across the entire region, and should be and that it benefits everybody to be paying a fair share. So I'll stop here, but I'm happy to help, but without the dog in the background.
Thank you, Peter. I mean, I think we would love to know, we would love to hear anything else you have to say about this, because the more we understand the, history and context, the better, able we're going to be able to put together a set of policy recommendations. But definitely there is a lot of history built up in the way the system is funded and functions. And that's something that we're confronting is too strong of a word, but that is a reality of what engaging in this conversation is like. So it's a very good flag.
Thank you for that, Peter. Appreciate it. Kendra, who I know a couple people have had to drop off now, but Kendra put a comment in the chat. I don't know if you want to address that now, Elizabeth, or maybe another time, but outside of the report, what role will CMAP play in collective advocacy to push toward action, and a few other thoughts there, but want to make sure you didn't miss that, because it's.
Oh, this is a really important comment from Kendra, and I'm sure others are thinking it if they didn't say it. So there are a lot of organizations in the region that are rallying around this cause, because I think, those of us who care about the planning space generally understand the important role that transit plays in all of our communities and in advancing our broader goals. So yeah, there's a lot of good energy happening right now. The RTA is about to come out with their strategic plan, which defines an advocacy and an action list for things that they and other stakeholders are going to be working on starting immediately. I think we're supportive of all of that work. Our legislative affairs team is meeting monthly, with groups of people from MPC and RTA and Active Trans and others who are already working on this. And yeah, we're aware that it's gonna take a village, and it's gonna have to come from all fronts. But our project team specifically is going to be working on developing the set of proposals that we're going to put forward in this report. But CMAP more broadly is going to participate with partners in trying to figure out the way forward.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for Elizabeth? Any other comments?
And then I have, if we have time, Austin, do we have time if I want to ask a couple of discussion questions?
I think we have a few minutes.
Okay. Well, maybe if anybody has any more kind of procedural questions, feel free to ask them, but perhaps with the few minutes that remain, if I could get a few thoughts from you all, this would be very helpful on some of the discussion questions. So next slide, please. And I can basically have two slides trying to stimulate some thought in how, you know, there's an economic benefit to transit. These are some stats from the American Public Transit Association in terms of like the economic impact of transit. This is, you know, in the interest of time, we can just go through it. We have a slide talking about the Thompson Center. They thought transit was important. Google thought transit was important when they bought the Thompson Center. Next slide. So just trying to, you know, get the juices flowing, but it sounds like they are flowing. The questions I wanted to ask, the first one is practical for us because this is the work that we're doing right now, trying to think about how we can make the best business or economic case for investing in high quality transit in Northeastern Illinois. The corollary of that is what happens if we fail. You know, some of the thoughts that we've already had here are the ways that the transit system supports commutes and allows workers to, you know, reach their job destinations, promotes efficient land use, helps us as a global city, an international destination, but what else? What items should we be thinking about here? Or alternatively, if this one moves you more, do you think we are in a stable expression of telework, or is it likely to continue to significantly change? These are both things I wanted to pick y'all's brain about a little bit.
This is Adam. I think we need to be, in addition to all these arguments, I think we need to be ready to counter the argument that like the pandemic permanently changed patterns so that the importance of transit is going to continue to decline or at least reach a new low and stay there indefinitely, right? I'm hearing that argument already. I think sometimes it's offered as a devil's advocate type argument from other advocates, but I've heard it from folks who believe it too, right? That the commute patterns have changed permanently and that increasing or even maintaining investment in transit isn't going to make sense in the long term. And I think we have to be ready to push back strong against that argument because I think it's going to be out there. I don't have any specific counter arguments as yet, but it's got to be part of the messaging package in my view.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. I feel like I'm starting to hear that too a little bit.
Oh yeah, most definitely. Caitlin?
Hi. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of people coming back to the office. I don't think that we are where we are and we're going to stay this way. I think there's still going to be a significant amount of evolution. Obviously, we won't go back to the way we were, but a couple things to think about. So eventually, the office market will have to be sort of denser, right? So it's going to take a long time, but eventually, even if people are only working or commuting 3 days a week, we're going to have more people coming to commute 3 days a week. Does that make any sense? I don't think I'm expressing myself clearly there, but so right now we have a very high vacancy rate. So there's the vacancy rate and there's the actual utilization rate. Utilization rate, we're at 50% of pre-COVID. Vacancy rate is different. That's who is paying rent on office space, right? And that can change over time. Over time, it's going to have to change, right? We'll have to have a lower vacancy rate or everything's going to fall apart. So therefore, and as people or tenants have new leases, they are going to have smaller leases, right? But eventually more leases. And so eventually you're still going to have the same amount of people coming downtown, even if they're not coming every day, right? So also we need to think about how apparently one thing that looks like is going to stay is a very big difference between Wednesdays and Fridays, right? So it used to be Monday through Friday, everything was the same. Now we're seeing a huge difference in that. And then the other thing that I think is really important is sort of this chicken or the egg problem, which is a lot of people don't want to commute downtown because their commute is not the same anymore. The things we used to rely on with the CTA and the Metro are just not the same anymore. So I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Metro still isn't operating at on a normal schedule, correct? So that makes people say, well, I'm going to go in once a week and I'm just going to drive, right? So it's a chicken or the egg thing. And then obviously we hear with the CTA so many conversations about safety or perceptions of safety and things happening on the trains, and which it just really, you hear all the time about people not wanting to take the train anymore. So I think it's really important that we see the transit as like, we have to invest in the transit. That has to improve things first in order to get people to use it more. Otherwise, it's just a slippery slope to the bottom where nobody uses it, so we don't invest in it, and then we just won't have it anymore. And that, I mean, obviously is one of our largest strengths as a metropolitan area. It's one of the things that basically only New York City can compete with us on our transit. So we really need to keep it at the forefront of, it is one of our largest strengths, and we don't want to lose it. And I'm done.
Well, Caitlin, I think you've sparked some interest here in the conversation. And to all of your points, I think yes. Let me call on Kevin, since he's got that really cool White Sox sign in the background.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna agree with Adam and Caitlin. So go back and listen to the recording and just put a check mark, another check mark by that. And I'll talk a little bit in the quick updates at the end about what Caitlin was saying about office sizes decreasing, but you're still getting the same number eventually as it kind of evens out, as what we've seen in Hoffman Estates. But to your first question, supporting commutes, promoting efficient land use, absolutely. The other thing I would add, and it's almost along the lines of quality of place type of thing, but it facilitates memories. And I think of memories back, whether it's tourism that I grew up in. I'm so glad you showed it. I grew up in St. Charles, so that was your picture 2 or 3 slides ago, where on the weekends we'd take the train into the city to go enjoy some touristy thing, whether it was a museum or a show or just the lake or whatever it was. And that transit helped facilitate a great memory I have. And now I think, like, we're in Hoffman Estates where we don't have a train line, but we have I-90 and some of the things that Pace has been trying to do with their bus lanes and things like that, which is fantastic. But getting people back to that, and what kind of land uses can we build around it that will help facilitate memories? And so I think kind of that non-quantitative, but that real qualitative side that pulls on people's heartstrings. Like, there's something there for why you invest in this stuff. So I'll let others talk, because I love when you ask a question to this committee, we're going to have some responses. So I'll let somebody else talk.
It's such a shy group. Christy.
So Elizabeth, I want to just state the obvious to your first discussion point, which is why invest in high quality transit. Within this framework, you haven't really had an equitable problem statement, or even identified. And I want to just say that there are large swaths of the region that don't have, transportation access is a challenge, and it is impacting the economic potential of individuals. So it's not just transportation, infrastructure to have, good transit, but it's really to try to help move people to jobs or locate commuters into areas of employment, et cetera. So I just wanted to make sure that that was something that is elevated in this discussion. I think that's going to move the General Assembly and others to rethink about our investment strategies.
Amen to that, Christy. Thank you for that. Joan?
Hi, and I'm sorry if this is a little out of the box, but I feel like we've always done really great with transportation, like more thinking of a suburban view, with feeding into the city, feeding out of the city, doing something in some sort of mass way. But we've always had these other challenges of transportation that's alternate to that, right? Like, so it's hard to get from point A to B in the suburbs. Lots of times, like your route might be like, well, you got to go into the city and then come back out, in order to cross through. And that's been an impact and a barrier for many people, just because the transportation system was really built around that in and out of the city. And so the challenge, I think, with some of these ways that we've changed is that more people are experiencing that need for transportation that's different than in and out of the city. And that's just a bigger challenge. It's a harder problem to solve because it requires so much more flexibility without that mass movement. It's just my thoughts.
No,
Yeah,
it's a-
thank you, Joan. That resonates actually with something Peter put in the comments, which is like, okay, if we have this hub and spoke based system, but we're seeing more, I think you could say like multinodalism or, you know, things all roads not leading downtown in the same way that they used to. How can we facilitate non-car movement between different places that are areas of the region that are not downtown and wherever you want to go? And I think this is part of why we're so interested in the bus and how efficient and pleasant it can be. Because we do think that there is a possibility to build up a bus service and a bus quality that people are more open to. But Peter's point is like, well, people don't really like the bus. What about light rail? And I think that's a good question, a question that we're gonna get asked. But considering how like inexpensive and flexible the bus can be in comparison to these major infrastructure investments, it seems like kind of more of the sweet spot, especially since we don't have a final expression of this sort of travel market or these economic patterns. The flexibility, I think, is useful. I'd also like to go back to Caitlin, what you said. If I'm understanding you, part of what you were saying was that you think that eventually vacancy will go down in the loop because everyone will have smaller offices and might actually, like, everybody's got to bunch up a lot and new firms have got to come in. My question is if you think, or if others in the committee think, that actually down the loop will be full of office eventually, however long it would take the market to clear, like maybe more offices of smaller size with more hoteling or whatever in it. Or think about what the city is doing with LaSalle Street. Is there going to be some kind of like need to change uses?
I think that any conversion to residential that can get done would be great, but I don't think we should be putting all our eggs in that basket. I think it's much harder than people think, especially so if you look at the office market, it's the buildings that are struggling the most are the ones built in like the 80s and the 90s, sort of the big Miesian kind of buildings that don't have the fancy amenities anymore, so they aren't attracting, the best tenants, but also don't have that like quality that the older buildings had, that like sort of that we all, I don't know, the architectural quality that we all love. And they also just by just their floor plates, they do not translate well into any kind of conversion, unfortunately, be that hotel or residential. So I think that we should be looking to have things converted to residential as wherever we can. And I think owners and developers are trying to look at that as much as possible, but there are a lot of buildings that's just not going to happen with, and we really need to figure out ways to make those buildings relevant again somehow. Not sure how.
Hey, thank you, Caitlin. Elizabeth, thank you again. We are falling behind now, and I'm told we need to move on. No apologies at all. This is a great kind of conversation. I think Peter had his hand up. I'm sure he'll follow up with you directly. And obviously, it's going to be an ongoing conversation. But, we do have Jonathan waiting. I know he's probably got some interesting stuff to tell us as well. So with that, our next item is the Regional Housing Coordination, and we're going to start with Jonathan. Jonathan, are you still with us?
I am. Thanks, Bob. If we could jump to the next slide, please. Awesome. Thank you. So good morning. My name is Jonathan Birch with CMAP. I'm joined by Rakaya Abdallah and Asha Barnes, and we're excited to spend some time brainstorming with you about how CMAP can best help the region address its most pressing housing issues. It was great to see the conversation that Alex had jump started a little bit earlier, but our goal is actually maybe take a little bit of step back from the details of the strategic direction. And we have some broader questions later on to get, which is, I think, in some ways, some of the content that you were already edging towards. Next slide. To set the stage for that conversation, though, we're going to start prime that conversation with a little bit of data and context, but as I said, hope to spend most of the time talking, which the group was already rolling on for. Next slide. So why are we coming to you now with this discussion? Next slide. Really, this is about important changes in what metropolitan planning organizations like CMAP are asked to do and can do because of last year's infrastructure bill. It requires CMAP to increase our coordination and consultation with housing organizations across the region, especially housing funders. That means organizations like public housing authorities, the Illinois Housing Development Authority, and entities that manage things like community development block grants, home funds, homeless funds, things of that nature. It asks metropolitan planning organizations to integrate housing more deeply into our transportation planning efforts, thinking about the interplay between where people live and how they access essential things like healthcare, jobs, and schools. And finally, it gives us the option to create a housing coordination plan. And while decisions about if and how to pursue a regional housing coordination plan are tied up into bigger picture questions about, the 2060 plan and other similar sorts of things, we wanted to go ahead this morning and get started thinking about how we can use this new authority now to help the region address important housing issues, even while we're working on some of those bigger picture questions. Next slide. Of course, CMAP has done housing work in one form or another since its inception. This work has used many of the tools that are outlined on the screen, whether that's providing data updates about key housing trends or providing direct assistance to communities working on key housing issues, or convening groups like housing authorities on a regular basis. But we are intending to look at this work with fresh eyes and are asking you today to help CMAP think a little bit about how it can best help the region address those most pressing housing issues. And with that, I'm going to pass this on to my colleague Rakaya, who's going to help set the stage with a little bit of data.
Hi all, my name is Rakaya Abdullah, and I will be highlighting some regional data points to show the changes demographically and how it relates to housing. Next slide. The total pop is about 8.5 million, and the median income is around 83,000. We find that there's an increase in the number of seniors. Next slide. The region is becoming more diverse with an increase in the Hispanic, Latino, Asian, and multiracial population. Next slide. But it's not meeting our housing needs with an aging and diversifying population. Next slide. Next slide. This slide shows that owners tend to be older than renters, and there's a wide income disparity gap between renters and owners, renters making half of owner-occupied households. Both groups are both experiencing being cost burden. 1 in 2 renters and 1 in 4 household owners are spending higher proportions of their income on housing, increasingly high proportions of their income on housing. Next slide. This last slide is based on CMAP's projections. By 2050, total households are projected to grow over 1 million, yet our average household size is still decreasing. All in all, housing needs to be a priority. Now I'm going to hand it over to Asha to go over our recent CMAP's recent municipal survey data.
Awesome. Hello, my name is Asha Barnes, and I will discuss the results of a housing survey we conducted for the region. These are questions concerning current housing efforts, housing concerns, and priorities. Next slide. It is important to note that a majority of our respondents are government officials or representatives. We mostly work with municipalities, but this is just one opinion on housing needs and priorities. We want your opinion on these topics and how CMAP can better serve as a resource for addressing these issues. When asked about priority housing issues in the region, housing stock for seniors, diverse housing stock, absentee landlords, and lack of affordable housing were ranked high as pressing housing issues. Later, we will ask you about what you think are the most pressing issues in the region. So this slide might be helpful to think about those questions. Next slide. When looking through our results, we used our cohort evaluation tool, which indicates within the region who has the most technical need. Cohort 1 are municipalities having the least need, and cohort 4 are municipalities with the most need. Next slide. We want to break down these priority responses a bit. This graph shows that municipalities with the least amount of need and the most amount of need felt that they needed more housing for seniors, though senior housing is a priority for all cohorts. Next slide. For diverse housing stock, this is a high priority for cohorts 1 and 4 again. The housing that they currently have does not reflect their housing needs. Next slide. And housing affordability broadly is mostly a priority for cohorts 1 and 4, as you can see in this graph. Next slide. But for all cohorts, affordability by tenure was an issue. For cohorts 1, 3, and 4, homes are too expensive, but for rental dwellings, this is a high priority for at least some municipalities across the region. Answers vary over time. In our experience working in housing at CMAP, we see that communities think differently about affordability. Next slide. We see here that absentee landlords are an issue for cohorts with the most need, 3 and 4, and vacancy, foreclosure, and abandonment is a huge priority for cohort 4. Next slide. Lastly, housing conditions and decreasing value of homes is a high priority for cohort 4, though we see that these issues are high priority for the municipalities with moderate to most need. And now I'll pass it back to Jonathan to facilitate our group discussion.
Thanks, Sasha. Next slide. So with that bit of context, our goal is to spend the rest of the time focusing on discussion. And as I said earlier, the questions are sort of high level in nature because they really are sort of a starting point or jumping off point as we work more on program development and things of that nature. And so I see that there's some questions. I think we'll jump to the initial question slide, and maybe if there's also questions on the stuff we just presented, we'll be able to capture those at that time as well. So the next slide, please. Thank you. Our first question is, what is the most pressing housing issue in our region? Obviously, we saw some different responses from municipalities across the region in terms of maybe how they would choose to prioritize that or what would come up. But we're very interested in your experiences, either whether it comes from professional sphere or personal experiences, as just as residents of the region. It looks like Christy.
So I had a question about the data, but I'll answer this question first. I think, the burden that we're seeing in the South suburbs and representing 45 municipalities in South Cook and Will is really property taxes for homeowners. They're getting challenged to stay in their homes, make their payments. I think that's also impacting the abandonment rate that you noted before, foreclosures, et cetera. So I think in general, the tax pressure is a challenge. Obviously, there's a lot of need and affordable rents and whatnot. But again, some of that is the property tax burden is impacting what landlords feel they must rent properties for in order to make their payments, et cetera, and have a profit on their building. So one of the things that relatedly in the past slides, you noted landlords and abandonment. Are you tracking multi-unit properties and finding what's being abandoned within that housing type? That's just a question. You don't have to answer it necessarily now, but I am interested in pursuing and understanding the data that you may have.
Yeah, I don't know that we have necessarily tracking information ready. Actually, part of the one of the things I think will come as a result of this conversation is asking questions around what sort of additional data work CMAP may be able to do in spaces that would be valuable. So I'm taking that maybe as a way of something that would be valuable to those organizations in SSMMA as you're thinking about some of those sorts of issues. But I think the property tax question is also a really interesting one that you raise, Christy, just because, again, right, it can be an important key driver of housing costs too, not just rent increases or not just mortgage interest rates or, you know, money is available for down payments, but that's a good thing to flag as well. Thanks.
Kevin.
Yep, I'll jump in here. This is a tough question because it's like asking, well, what's your favorite color? You're going to get a lot of answers depending on where you are. Because Christy, you're right. Like I've heard from a lot of my economic development professionals in the communities down there, and yeah, those property taxes are a huge burden. We don't have that same issue up here in the northwest suburbs. Ours, and even to some degree, because Hoffman Estates and Elk Grove kind of in our region in this, I guess, Schaumburg larger market, and even in Elgin there, we have a bunch of hospitals. So we have a lot of senior housing already near those hospitals because, right, that's where services are needed the most. So even the senior piece isn't necessarily an issue up here, but it's more just a diversity of housing that we have a lot of post-World War II homes that are great for, you know, 1-2 kids, but for people just moving, that Gen Z moving out here, we don't have much. And so it's all right, let's get more of a diverse housing stock. Let's get something for that baby boomer who wants to downsize and doesn't have something, but doesn't want, excuse me, wants all of the amenities that their Gen Z child might have or their millennial might have. And so just getting a more diverse housing stock is more of what I'm seeing here in the northwest suburbs.
Interesting. And so when you're, I wanted to ask a follow-up question if I might, Bob.
Yes.
So as you're looking at that, what sorts of, how does that conversation look in Hoffman Estates when you talk about that? Is it, what sorts of topics come up or what sorts of questions are asked by residents, things of that nature?
Yeah. So we'll get like some questions of actually, so we just approved some new, I'll say pretty standard 2020 suburban apartments, 3 stories. You know, it has the amenity, the clubhouse, like anything you'd find anywhere pretty much. And that's our first multifamily going up since the late 70s in Hoffman Estates. So we get a lot of questions of what is this, what's it about? But I also get like I said, the excitement from the baby boomer who wants to downsize to something, although they're confused why there isn't an elevator. So I have to explain to them not, you know, codes and things like that. But yeah, but it's more just a general excitement about bringing in more housing products because, for example, for where I was when I was in a really nice ranch home with 2 bedrooms until I had more kids and I needed to upsize my home. And so, okay, let's look in the area. What do we have? And so really just making sure we have housing from the affordable studio apartment all the way to the 4 or 5 bedroom for, I have 5 kids. So me with my large family that there's always screaming in the house, finding space for everybody to be able to live at all price points too.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Other feedback on this question?
Maybe we'll jump to the next question.
Yeah, sounds good, John.
So the next question is the housing in our region a barrier to economic development? This is not necessarily a no, yes or no. I'm sure each of you probably has a different perspective on this question, whether you see it locally or regionally, but we're certainly very interested in this question and sort of the tie between those different sorts of points, because some of the flexibility that were provided under the infrastructure bill really is speaking to sort of the nexus of transportation, housing, and economic development.
Caitlin.
So I think it's very important to always keep in mind how things look from a national perspective. And from a national perspective, housing in our region is absolutely not a barrier to economic development. It's we have affordable housing compared to everyone else. It is one of our one of our strengths, I would say. So I'm not saying it's not important and not that lots of improvements could be made, but I would not call it a barrier. It's definitely more of a barrier, even in rapidly growing places, say like Austin, where they can't really build housing fast enough and may not even ever be able to, to have enough housing to meet demand, and prices are just going through the roof. That's not exactly what's happening here. So, and I also think that we have space for more housing. We could build so much more housing over, the next 50 years, where a lot of metropolitan areas are much more constrained. So that's just what I would say from a national perspective.
I think that's right, Caitlin. And it's funny, this is a photo of downtown Oak Park, and over the past 8 years or so, they've really developed downtown TOD housing, and downtown Oak Park is kind of thriving right now. So more than a barrier, that kind of development can just be an economic driver. Kim?
I guess my comment, or it maybe even question, is what kind of economic development? Having done economic development in previous positions, it oftentimes makes me think that when you think of communities like a downtown Oak Park, you'll have sort of developments that are geared towards higher income, middle, and income and above. Whereas when you start to think about communities that are maybe much more marginalized, and you could build, let's say you built 4 massive apartment complexes that might be subsidized housing. You don't get that same level of economic development oftentimes. You might get a corner store or something that may pop up in a small strip center that may cater to, the residents in that community. But sometimes you just don't see that, that big push for that diversity of economic development, the diversity of restaurants. You don't often see the Potbellies and the Jersey Subs going into certain types of communities, and you may have just infused 200 affordable rental units in a community. You just don't see that type of economic development chasing those types of developments oftentimes. So I often wonder, what type of economic development do you see when you start to infuse more housing into areas?
Thanks for that, Kim. Other comments, reactions to this question?
I think Kim raises some interesting questions. I'm also curious from what Caitlin said before, the sort of national perspective again versus what folks see at the local level, right? It's one thing just because national site selectors might say, housing pretty affordable here relative to Austin or Denver. There's places on the coast, but it's another thing when you're thinking locally about your ability to have rooftops and attract business. It's much more local in nature.
Bob, if I can, I'll just jump in real quick and just say, I agree with Caitlin. I had a friend who just moved. He was in Nashville for a long time and he moved out because that's another one of those places. Like they're building everything, and everything that was there is going up in price, and it's just not sustainable. So my comment would be, it's a factor and a significant factor, housing is, but I don't believe here it's a barrier. And that being said, it's a pretty big factor. Like if you don't have housing for the workforce that a new 300 employee company wants, they're going to go to Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, wherever their workforce is, be that white collar, blue collar, whatever collar they have, or no collar because you're working from home. And so, it's a pretty big factor, but I wouldn't say at this point it's a barrier necessarily to economic development growth.
Appreciate that, Kevin. Appreciate the shot at my collarless shirt too. Any other comments or questions or thoughts on?
Can I say one more thing quickly?
You can.
I think one of the most interesting things that we've seen recently in towns such as Nashville and Austin and Denver is that initially people were drawn to them because of their affordability. And because of their limited size and ability to meet that demand, the affordability, now they have the exact opposite problem. And I think one of our biggest strengths is because of our size, we actually could have much more demand and we could meet that demand without having the problems that these small metropolitan areas are having. But so I would say, instead of saying a barrier to economic development, I would say it's an opportunity for economic development. We definitely could have more and do more, but it's something that we can build our economic development on, as opposed to a barrier.
Nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded. Exactly. Any other thoughts or questions? Jonathan?
Maybe we'll jump to the next one. So what does it mean for the region if we lack affordable housing options near essential services, whether that be transit, job centers, good schools, things of that nature? What this is helping, trying to get us to think a little bit about the sort of relationship between where our housing options are and what housing options are near transit versus other key essential services or important hubs, attractors.
Hello, this is Obai with Equiticity. I say that there's a significant impact on Black and Brown people and low to moderate income people achieving higher levels of economic freedom when affordable housing is not located near these services. And going back to the previous question, I do think housing is a barrier to economic development in the region, especially for Black and Brown people and low to moderate income people, given the spatial mismatch, affordable housing, living in affordable housing in the city and trying to get to job centers or get to transportation services. It's tough, it's challenging for folks.
Thank you for that, Obai.
I'll piggyback. Thank you for that comment, because I would say, what does it mean? I think it means slower economic growth. You're going to have economic growth, but as he said, in those Black and Brown communities, they might be slower to grow. And by slower, I mean like 2, 3, 4 generations to grow, as opposed to if you can get some things in there, growth can happen quicker within that person's lifetime, within that person's generation, and not their great grandchildren's generation, where they're finally seeing some of that growth. So if you can get it in the affordable housing and near those essential services, I think you're getting a quicker growth for the region.
Thanks, Kevin. Any other thoughts or reactions on this question?
Maybe we'll put a slightly different spin on this one, which is, part of this question is assuming that this mismatch already exists in the region and does to a pretty significant degree. I'd sort of love people's perspectives on the degree to which they see that playing out in their communities or in their lives or in their professional spheres, the degree to which they see that mismatch already taking place and the degree to which we are or not making progress on that front.
This Obai again. You all may know we did a research study titled Mobility Justice in Chicago. This was about 3 or 4 years ago. That research is available on our website. And we did focus groups, and one of the questions we asked was to the degree that transportation was a barrier to increased employment opportunities. And I think 75% of respondents said transportation was a barrier to getting or keeping a job. And that speaks to the spatial mismatch. Black and Brown people in low to moderate income neighborhoods are not able to get to the job centers.
Thanks, Obai.
Can I also just point out something, Jonathan? CMAP had a project, I don't remember, it was probably 3 or 4 years ago, where they were mapping sort of this nexus of Metra, essentially, but public transportation and potential for job centers. And they were looking at, and I can't remember what the acronym and sort of what the motivation was, but I recall that there was identification of a couple of current job centers where there was other supportive services in the area that CMAP proposed viewed as greater areas of opportunity. And much like Obai said, the entire Metro Electric line, the Rock Island line in the south suburbs, et cetera, were just not even part of the reinvestment strategy based on those premises, because there were less access to the actual transit lines. And what I'm saying is those were the very area, I guess why I'm trying to show this as a correlation is because this is some of those areas that CMAP had identified were like Schaumburg and other places did not have the same level of affordable housing. So it was really, to me, it was a mismatch in public policy strategy. So take a look back through that. And I think what may arise is really how this, disconnect between affordable housing and some of these other, the essential services
Thanks, Christy.
are perceived.
Thanks, Christy. I know we've taken in different iterations for many years now, done different iterations of the jobs housing mismatch work. So I know there's a lot of different cuts on that we've done over the years that we can pull from. So that's always a good reminder to pull from that. Thank you.
All right, Jonathan, we should probably wrap up and
Yeah, sure. So if we're done, I wanted to say thank you with everybody. We can jump to, maybe we'll jump not to this one, but the last one. So just thanks everybody for your time today. You may see us out and about in the region. We'll be certainly having similar sorts of conversations with a bunch of different groups over the next month or so. Because we're interested in sort of continuing this conversation as we're starting our early stages on understanding, what additional housing work CMAP can be doing and how we can best support the issues that y'all are identifying across the region. So if there's additional thoughts you had later on, if you see something and you want to talk more about it, feel free to reach out to me or anyone else on the CMAP housing team. We're very interested in sort of continuing this conversation. And thanks for your time today.
well, thank you, and to all who helped put this together. That was great work, Jonathan. So let's move on to other business. I know we have some brief reports that some of our committee members want to update us on. This is always fun. Christy, I have you at the top of the list. Did you have something to tell us about?
I do. I just wanted to let everyone know, I think I presented to this committee some time ago, like over a year or so ago, that SSMMA had a legislative initiative that we were calling the Southland Reactivation Act. It was actually signed into law this summer, so it passed the General Assembly last year, and it is Public Act 102-1010. But the Southland Reactivation Act is a brand new property tax incentive for 6 townships in Cook County in the south suburbs that seeks to try to get tax exempt parcels currently owned by municipalities or our partnering land banks, the Cook County Land Bank or the South Suburban Land Bank, and bring those back onto the tax rolls, adding to the tax base and lowering our tax rates ultimately. We put together a I'm going to just say my staff put together a stellar website and toolkit for our municipalities, because it is a new construct never seen before, where we're taking tax exempt parcels, bringing them back to their base year, which was when they fell off the tax rolls, and then creating a methodology for getting them back on the tax rolls at a significantly lower rate. Happy to share that information. It's all up on our website. I won't take the time now because I know we're at the end of our meeting time, but I'm really proud of that work. And I can tell you that several potential parcels, municipalities are already looking at parcels. We have 3,000 some mapped. So we've already pre-identified those available, worked with the Cook County Assessor, the Treasurer's Office, the Clerk's Office, and we're all working and the General Assembly members, and we're all working in tandem. What I will say is that when I was testifying and down in Springfield trying to navigate this process, other parts of the region were saying to us, you know, why don't we have this? Because this is a really unique look at how do we get properties back on the tax rolls in a way that invests in bricks and mortar and jobs, as opposed to worrying about the sort of the high cost of doing business for a set period of time. So take a look at it. SSM, I'll put our website link into the chat, and then anyone who's interested, happy to answer any questions that you may have now or in the future.
That's great, Christy. Thank you very much for that. Kevin, I understand that you wanted to touch on something that we were briefly touching on earlier in our conversation.
Yeah, it's regarding a project in Hoffman Estates that pre-COVID, we were planning a meeting out at this site, and then obviously COVID shut things down. So maybe one day we can do a site visit. But it's this the redevelopment of the old AT&T campus, now called Bellworks, and I'll put a link to it in the chat there. But yeah, it was kind of regarding that. So they call this a MetroBurb. It's a developer out of New Jersey had taken a 2 million square foot building there and repurposed it. It used to be one big office tenant, and now they have somewhere between 70 and 80 tenants in smaller spots, but it's filled up really quickly, and they call it a MetroBurb because it's a metropolis. So everything you would find down at the old post office, from living nearby to the coffee shop and food hall you love, to daycare and doggy daycare nearby, all of that under one roof, but in the suburbs. And so kind of you get all the amenities of being in the suburbs as well. And so it's a really unique project, but to the point Caitlin was making before, they're getting some of the office leases, which is rare. But the big fish in the office isn't 100, 200, 300,000 square feet anymore. It's 40, 50, and 60,000 square feet. And so it just shows like the offices are coming back, but they're going much smaller because somebody's not coming in every day to the office. So it's a unique use, and tying it to the old post office where you guys are at CMAP there, the fun part of it is when the village, we actually found this developer in New Jersey and met him out here to repurpose this AT&T site. And the reason he was coming out was because his friend at the time in 2017 was planning to redo, he said, some old post office. I don't know. I'm going to go see what he's going to do with it, kind of thing. And so just kind of showing that great ideas happen amongst friends. And so there is a connection to, you know, good projects can happen in the city and in the suburbs, and they can be real unique. So maybe someday we'll have a site visit out here, but like I said, I'll put a link to it in the chat. And if you ever find yourself out in the northwest suburbs, please stop by and we'll get a cup of coffee there, and I'll give you a tour.
Great, thank you for that, Kevin. Yes, some old post office or something. Shannon, if I'm not mistaken, you're launching a program.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bob. Hi, everybody. Shannon McGee at MHub. We are launching, we just released an RFP on Friday underneath the Catalyze initiative, which is the work that I lead focused on equitable access to entrepreneurship. So we are looking for a business support organization or entrepreneur support organization located on the south or west sides of the city, including Chicagoland, so outside of city proper, to collaborate on business development, a program for entrepreneurs. So we'll award up to $100,000 for this work. We also will include access to MHub's resources and prototyping and technical training, and also our digital curriculum, which is launching in March. So if you know any organizations who might be looking to partner on something like this, please send them my way. I will include a link in the chat as well.
Very cool, Shannon. Thanks for sharing. Any other updates? I had one I wanted to touch on briefly myself. Then I wanted to let the committee know that our liaison, Austin Edwards, this is his last meeting as our liaison. He's not leaving CMAP. He's just taking on other responsibilities, but really wanted to thank him. And I don't mean to embarrass him, although I take great pleasure in embarrassing him. He's been incredibly dedicated, a pleasure to work for. I do understand that our next liaison is going to be Elizabeth Ginsburg, who is actually quite brilliant in her own right. So incredibly excited to be working with Elizabeth again. But Austin, thank you for your work with this committee. And it has not gone unnoticed that these meetings have gone incredibly well under your stewardship. So thank you. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. I've been working with the committees for about 5 years now, both the regional economy and before that, the economic development committee. And I've learned a lot in the process. So as you said, not going anywhere, just sort of passing the baton to other great analysts here at CMAP. I'm excited to see where we all take it next.
Well, thanks again, my friend. Tara, you had an update for us.
Yes, hi. This is one of my favorite parts of the meeting because we can kind of compare notes on what everyone else is doing, and I also say, interestingly, to see where we intersect. So, Kevin, your update on the AT&T, right? So Cook County, it's AT&T is right along Central Road, where I was meeting with our team on we're planning to reconstruct that roadway, and how does transportation fit into this, right? AT&T is situated right adjacent to the Pace Kiss and Ride, right? So you can take the Illinois, you can take the bus down the Illinois Tollway, go to the Pace Kiss and Ride. When Cook County is done with the project, you'll be able to take, through partnership with Hoffman Estates, the shared use path from the Kiss and Ride all the way to Paul Douglas Forest Preserve. So it was funny to see you highlight that project where county investments are going also. I just wanted to share some other information. I'm going to put it in the chat because we are at time. Just areas where the Cook County Department of Transportation and Highways is kind of in this space. First link is under the leadership of President Prunkwinkle. The department, we're on the end of year 2 for a 3-year pilot. It was launched in January of 2021. It offers a 50% fare reduction on Metro Electric and Rock Island lines and increased service on Pace Route 352 on Halsted. So the goal of the program is to benefit commuters in the county's south suburbs and on the south side of Chicago. So if you want to hear more about that, please check out that link. And then also just want to highlight again, we're in our 6th year of our Invest in Cook program. I put that on there also. All of our projects, you can look each year on what those awards are. Some just I thought that are interesting. And again, with the people here, the Illinois Medical District received an award for transportation planning and feasibility study to address cyclist and pedestrian safety on the medical campus. We also, in 2021, the Friends of Big Marsh. So we're looking for even private non-for-profit, in addition to governmental entities to partner with. We gave them a $60,000 funding for a trail expansion feasibility study to explore connections for pedestrians and cyclists between Big Marsh Park, Indian Ridge Marsh, and neighborhoods in Chicago's southeast side, including South Deering, Headwish, and Trumbull Park. So that and many others are listed at that link. And great discussion today, everyone. Good to be with all of you. That concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Tara. Appreciate all of that. Let's move on to see if there is any public comment today.
Chair, if I may, not other public comment, but other business real quick. I guess a request of staff, and I'm sure you'll get a lot more of this, but regarding the 2050 forecast of populations, I just posted it in the chat. That's what CMAP has put out in October. And there was just some concerns from not only me, but several of my counterparts. And that's why I say you might hear otherwise of it. And I don't know the ins and outs, the exact formula used, but it was just concerning to see some communities, for example, Hoffman Estates over the next 10 years would decline in population by about 15%, whereas Schaumburg would stay about the same. And I use those two as an example because our borders are literally doing this. So the fact that one community could decline so much in population while the other could not was just surprising. And again, I don't know the answer or the solution for that model, but I guess I would make a request of staff to go back and maybe double check some of that and see, just to take a look at it. Do these really make sense for all? For all the communities, or is this a model that really only fits certain communities. Again, I know we're at time, so I don't want to take up more time, but I would just raise that and make that request to take a second look at that.
Duly noted, Kevin. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Kevin. We can follow up on specific questions as
Yeah.
well. We are looking to expand our demography program as well.
Right. And is there any, did anyone offer public comment in advance, or is there public comment now?
We haven't received any in advance either by email or in the chat.
And I'm not hearing anyone else right now. So I think we are a minute over. Apologies for that. Next meeting, as noted, is January 26, 2023, not 2022. And so we will see you all then. Thank you so much. Great discussion. Appreciate all of you. Have a very safe, fun, and happy holiday Thanksgiving, and we'll talk soon. Bye.
Take care, everyone.